We like to think we have history figured out. Civilizations rose slowly, technology built on itself generation by generation, and ancient people, brilliant in their own way, were fundamentally limited by what they didn't yet know. That's the version we were taught. It's tidy, it's logical, and some of what we're about to show you will make you seriously question whether any of it is true. Because here's what they don't put in the textbooks: a mechanical computer that shouldn't have existed for another 2,000 years, pulled from a shipwreck. A temple so ancient it was built before farming, before cities, before writing, and yet somehow more architecturally sophisticated than almost anything that came after it for millennia. Walls assembled from stones heavier than aircraft, fitted together with a precision that baffles modern engineers today. A book that's been sitting in a library for 600 years that not one person on Earth has ever been able to read. And a set of drawings so enormous they can't even be seen from the ground, made by people who, according to the history we know, had no way to see them from above. These discoveries aren't fringe theories or internet speculation. They are peer-reviewed, professionally excavated, and sitting in the world's greatest museums and research institutions. And every single one of them forced historians to stop, step back, and admit, we had this wrong. In my opinion, ancient rare artifacts like the Antikythera Mechanism and Göbekli Tepe fascinate me because they prove how consistently we underestimate our ancestors. Every major discovery seems to remind us that our historical consensus is just the best story we could tell with the evidence we had at the time. These 5 discoveries didn't just add a footnote to history, they rewrote entire chapters of it. So if you're ready to look at the ancient world differently, we're glad you're here. Get comfortable and let's begin. Discovery 1. The Antikythera Mechanism, the world's first computer. In the spring of 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers sheltering from a storm near the small island of Antikythera decided to dive in the murky water below. What they found on the seafloor would become one of the most debated and astonishing objects in the history of science.
It was not recognized at all as being anything interesting when it was discovered. It was just a corroded lump about the size of a large dictionary.
Resting in the remains of a Roman-era shipwreck dating to around 70 to 60 BC was a corroded lump of bronze and wood roughly the size of a shoebox. It looked at first glance like nothing special, just another piece of corroded metal from an ancient vessel. But when it was brought to the surface and examined, researchers began to realize they were looking at something that had no business existing.
You can see these little groups of text letters and symbols, which I call glyphs.
The Antikythera Mechanism, as it came to be known, is an ancient analog computing device. Built sometime between 260 BC, it contains at least 30 interlocking bronze gears of extraordinary precision, and possibly as many as 37. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the cycles of the Olympic Games, model the movements of the 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks, and calculate the positions of the sun and moon on any given date. To understand why this matters, consider the context. The device predates the next known mechanical clock of similar complexity by more than 1,000 years. It predates the Renaissance by over 1,400 years. When this mechanism was built, Rome was still a republic. The concept of a machine that could model the cosmos with gears and dials was not supposed to exist in the ancient world. And yet, here it was. The mechanism was studied for decades, but its full complexity remained hidden beneath layers of corrosion. It wasn't until the early 2000s that researchers used advanced imaging technology, including X-ray tomography and polynomial texture mapping, to peer inside the corroded fragments without destroying them. What they found stunned the scientific community. The gearing was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. One gear train used a pin and slot mechanism to model the irregular motion of the moon across the sky, a mathematical technique not rediscovered in Europe until the 13th century. Inscriptions found on the device revealed it functioned as an astronomical and calendrical instrument. Front dials showed the positions of the sun and moon in the zodiac and tracked a 365-day Egyptian calendar alongside a 235-month Metonic cycle, the pattern that repeats every 19 years and allows calendars to sync solar and lunar time. The back dials tracked eclipse predictions using the Saros cycle, a pattern of 223 lunar months, and even contained a dial for the Callipic cycle of 76 years. But perhaps the most startling inscription found on the mechanism was a kind of instruction manual. Researchers translating the Greek text found detailed descriptions of what the dials represented and how to read them, suggesting the device was designed not just for one expert, but to be used and understood by others. It was, in a very real sense, a teaching tool about the universe. Who built it remains unknown. Some researchers have linked it to the school of the astronomer Hipparchus of Nicaea, who developed many of the mathematical models the device appears to use. Others point to a Rhodian origin. Ancient sources describe mechanical astronomical devices being made on the island of Rhodes, and the shipwreck may have been carrying the mechanism from there to Rome, possibly as a luxury gift for a powerful patron. What the Antikythera Mechanism rewrote was our entire understanding of ancient Greek technological capability. It proved that at least some ancient engineers possessed a mastery of precision metalworking, advanced mathematics, and astronomical theory that was not just sophisticated, it was genuinely world-class by any era's standard. The gear tolerances inside the mechanism are tight enough that researchers building modern replicas have struggled to match them using contemporary tools. The mechanism was not an anomaly in a vacuum. Ancient texts describe other mechanical wonders, automated theatres, self-moving devices, pneumatic organs, but nothing survives to compare with the Antikythera Mechanism's complexity. Its discovery forced historians to accept that the story of technology is not a clean, straight line from simple to complex. Entire branches of ancient engineering could flourish and then vanish, leaving almost no trace. Only a third of the original mechanism survives today. The rest either dissolved in the sea or has yet to be found. Ongoing excavations at the Antikythera wreck site continue to this day, and researchers hope to recover more fragments, or perhaps other devices that might tell us whether this was a one-of-a-kind masterpiece or one of many such instruments that simply did not survive the millennia. The Antikythera Mechanism sits today in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. It is small, it is brown and corroded, and it remains one of the most profound objects ever pulled from the sea, a reminder that the line between ancient and modern is far thinner than we like to believe. Discovery 2. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that changed everything we knew about civilization. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists operated on a fairly clear model of how civilization began. Hunter-gatherers settled down. They learned to farm. Farming created food surpluses. Surpluses allowed people to specialize, to become craftsmen, priests, and administrators. And specialization over generations gave rise to cities, writing, and religion. In short, agriculture came first. Complex society followed. Then, in the hills of southeastern Turkey, that model collapsed. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill in Turkish. It sits on a ridge near the city of Şanlıurfa, overlooking the flat plains of the Harran Basin toward the Syrian border. For decades, it was noted in surveys only as a curious mound scattered with broken limestone. Then, in 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began to excavate. What Schmidt uncovered was not a village, it was not a burial ground. It was a massive, deliberately constructed ceremonial complex, and it had been built approximately 11,600 years ago. That date is not a typo. Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by more than 6,000 years. It predates the invention of writing by at least 5,500 years. It predates the wheel, it predates pottery, and crucially, it predates agriculture. The structures at Göbekli Tepe consist of large circular and oval enclosures, each containing T-shaped limestone pillars that stand up to 6 meters tall and weigh up to 10 tons. The pillars were quarried from the surrounding plateau using stone tools, the marks of which can still be seen on unfinished pillars left in the bedrock, then transported and erected with no metal, no wheels, and no draft animals. The effort required is staggering, but it is what is carved onto the pillars that truly sets Göbekli Tepe apart. The stone is covered with extraordinarily detailed reliefs: foxes, boars, ducks, cranes, scorpions, spiders, vultures, and serpents. Abstract symbols are interspersed throughout. Some of the T-shaped pillars appear to have arms and hands carved onto their sides.
Called Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe means mound with belly, or mound with belly.
Suggesting they were meant to represent beings, perhaps deities, ancestors, or supernatural guardians. Whatever they symbolize, the carving is not crude. It is skilled, deliberate, and evidence of an artistic tradition with real depth. The implications of all this are profound. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They had no permanent settlements, no writing, no domesticated crops in the conventional sense, and yet they coordinated the labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people to quarry, transport, and erect massive stone structures decorated with sophisticated symbolic imagery. They maintained this project across centuries. Multiple enclosures were built in phases, one on top of another. This does not fit the model. The model said complex organized religion and monumental construction were products of civilization, things that emerged after surplus food and social hierarchies made them possible. Göbekli Tepe says something else entirely. It suggests that the impulse toward the sacred, toward communal ritual and symbolic expression may not be a product of civilization. It may be one of civilization's causes. The Schmidt hypothesis, now widely discussed though not universally accepted, proposes that it was the need to gather for ritual that drove early humans toward settlement and agriculture, to feed the workers who built and maintained Göbekli Tepe.
So the T-shapes are stilized humans, and very often in Göbekli Tepe,
people would have needed reliable, abundant food. That pressure may have accelerated the domestication of wild cereals in exactly this region of the Fertile Crescent. The chicken, in other words, may have come before the egg. What makes Göbekli Tepe even more mysterious is how it ended. Around 8000 BC, the site was deliberately buried, not abandoned, buried. The enclosures were filled in with rubble, animal bones, and flint tools, apparently by the same people who had built them. The reasons are unknown. Was this a ritual ending, a closing ceremony for a sacred space? Was it a response to some catastrophe or shift in belief? No one knows. But the deliberate nature of the burial preserved the site extraordinarily well, and may be the reason it survived for archaeologists to find thousands of years later. Excavations at Göbekli Tepe have barely scratched the surface. Geophysical surveys suggest that less than 5% of the total site has been uncovered. There may be dozens more enclosures buried beneath the hill. What else lies below, and what it might tell us about the minds of those who built it, remains one of archaeology's most tantalizing open questions. Discovery 3. The Voynich Manuscript, the book no one has ever read. In 1912, a Polish antique book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich was browsing through a collection of old manuscripts at the Villa Mondragone near Rome when he came across something unusual. Tucked among other ancient texts was a small book, roughly 23 centimeters wide and 16 centimeters tall, filled with dense handwritten text and elaborate illustrations. The vellum pages were worn and yellowed. The illustrations showed strange plants, astronomical diagrams, and figures of women bathing in interconnected pools, and the text, Page after page of neat flowing script was in a language no one recognized.
It's just a language that no one has seen yet or can understand.
More than a century later, it continues to stay unrecognizable. The Voynich Manuscript, as it came to be called, is one of the most studied and most baffling documents in the world. It runs to approximately 240 pages. Though there are signs that pages have been removed over the centuries, it appears to be written in a single consistent script, flowing left to right in neat lines, with word spacing, punctuation patterns, and frequency distributions that resemble natural written language. But despite the efforts of professional cryptographers, linguists, computer scientists, and amateur codebreakers, including teams that helped crack Axis Power's Enigma during World War II, no one has ever definitively deciphered a single word of it.
It looks like a written text. It has all the telltale signs, in fact statistical analysis.
Carbon dating performed in 2009 placed the vellum's creation between 1404 and 1438, solidly within the early 15th century. This rules out theories of much earlier or much later origin, but leaves the question of authorship and content completely open. The manuscript's provenance before it reached Voynich is murky. Letters found tucked inside the book suggest it may have passed through the hands of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who apparently paid 600 gold ducats for it, a substantial sum suggesting it was considered rare and valuable. But who created it and why remain unknown. The illustrations are deeply strange. The botanical section contains drawings of plants, but most do not correspond to any known species. Some botanists have suggested they resemble real plants in a highly stylized way. Others believe they are entirely invented. The astronomical section contains circular diagrams with star-like radiating shapes and what may be zodiac symbols, though the figures within them are unusual. The biological section, perhaps the most famous, shows dozens of small nude female figures bathing in elaborate interconnected pipe and tube structures, illustrated in soft green and brown inks. Theories about the manuscript's origin and meaning have proliferated wildly over the decades. It has been proposed as a pharmacopoeia, a medical reference written in a private cipher to protect sensitive herbal knowledge. It has been called a work of alchemy, a linguistic experiment, a hoax, a coded prayer book, and a document written in a constructed language. A 2019 study claimed to have identified the language as Proto-Romance, an ancestor of modern European Latin languages, but the claim was rejected by most linguists. A 2022 study proposed it might encode astrological and medical information in an extinct Central Asian language, but this too remains disputed. One of the most unsettling possibilities is that the Voynich manuscript is a hoax, a medieval forgery created to extract money from credulous buyers. The most prominent version of this theory suggests that the 15th century artist and polymath Antonio Avellino created it as an elaborate deception, but the internal consistency of the script and the statistical properties of the text are difficult to explain if the whole thing is nonsense. The letter frequencies, word lengths, and repetition patterns all behave more like a real language than randomly generated symbols. What the manuscript rewrote, or more precisely what it refuses to rewrite, is our confidence in our own ability to decode the past. We live in an era of extraordinary cryptographic and linguistic tools. We have decoded Linear B, cracked the Enigma cipher, translated languages dead for thousands of years. And yet this single small book, produced a mere 600 years ago, sits in the Beinecker Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University and refuses to give up its meaning. It is not ancient. It is not from a lost civilization. It was made by human hands in 15th century Europe or the Middle East, using tools and materials we understand. And yet it remains silent. The Voynich manuscript doesn't rewrite history by telling us something new. It rewrites history by reminding us how much we still don't know. Discovery 4. Sacsayhuamán, the fortress that shouldn't be possible. High above the city of Cusco in the Peruvian Andes, at an elevation of more than 3,700 meters above sea level, stands a structure that has been making engineers uneasy for centuries. Its name is Sacsayhuamán, roughly translated from Quechua as satisfied falcon, and it is a massive walled complex of terraces, towers and plazas built by the Inca on the steep slopes overlooking their imperial capital. It is not the largest ancient structure in the world, but it may be the most difficult to explain. Sacsayhuamán's main walls consist of 3 massive zigzagging terraces.
These walls appear most impossible, structures created of precision and left in mystery.
Each constructed from enormous limestone and andesite blocks. The largest single stone in the complex weighs an estimated 125 to 130 metric tons, comparable to a fully loaded Boeing 757. Another weighs around 100 tons. Many blocks weigh 50 to 80 tons as a matter of routine. They were quarried from sites kilometers away, transported across steep Andean terrain, and fitted together with a precision so extreme that a sheet of paper cannot be slid between them. No mortar was used, none was needed. The blocks were shaped to interlock with each other in complex polygonal patterns. No 2 blocks are identical in shape, yet each fits its neighbors perfectly, like an enormous 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle constructed from multi-ton stone. The result is a wall that has survived centuries of earthquakes, including major tremors that leveled much of Cusco multiple times, because the blocks can shift slightly under seismic stress and then resettle. The Inca, it turns out, were not just master stonemasons, they were earthquake engineers. Spanish conquistadors who arrived in the 16th century were utterly baffled by the structure. Some wrote that it must have been built by demons. Others proposed it was the work of a race of giants. The idea that human beings using only stone tools, ropes, wooden rollers and manpower could have produced something of this scale and precision struck them, and has struck many people since, as simply impossible. And yet the Inca did build it. We know this from historical accounts, from the archaeology, and from the remarkable fact that this tradition of stone fitting was not unique to Sacsayhuamán. It appears across the Inca Empire, from Machu Picchu to Ollantaytambo to the island temples of Lake Titicaca. The Inca were systematic and deliberate in their methods. They understood the properties of their stone. They had specialist stonecutters and vast organized labor pools drawn from the mitta system, a form of labor tax in which communities owed the empire weeks of physical work per year. What rewrites history here is the scale of what was achieved without a single element of what we typically associate with large construction projects. No iron tools, no steel chisels, no cranes or pulleys in the European sense, no wheeled vehicles in a culture where the wheel, remarkably, was known conceptually but never applied to transport. The Inca moved their stones using sledges, ramps, levers, and enormous coordinated teams of workers, and they did so in thin mountain air, across terrain that would challenge modern heavy equipment. Researchers have spent decades trying to reverse engineer Inca stonemasonry.
Modern scholars and archaeologists still speculate what purpose this ancient structure once served.
Experimental archaeology projects have used replica tools and period-appropriate techniques to cut and fit blocks, and while they can replicate the process in miniature, scaling it up to the stones of Sacsayhuamán presents challenges that remain incompletely solved. How the builders achieved such tight tolerances on stones weighing dozens of tons across a vast construction project without the ability to make fine adjustments once a block was in place continues to puzzle engineers. There is also the question of planning. Sacsayhuamán's zigzag wall design is not just decorative. The angles created defensive firing positions for warriors defending the complex. The layout of the terraces, towers, and plazas suggests careful strategic thinking about both the ceremonial and military functions of the site. This was not improvised. It was designed by architects and engineers whose names we do not know. working in a culture without writing, passing their knowledge through an oral tradition that the Spanish conquest did its best to erase. Today, Sacsayhuamán is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Much of its original stonework was plundered by the Spanish to build the churches and palaces of colonial Cusco. You can literally find Inca-cut stones in the foundations of 16th century colonial buildings in the city below. What remains is a fraction of what once stood, and yet even in its diminished state, Sacsayhuamán leaves visitors in the grip of a question that the best engineers in the world have not fully answered. How exactly did they do it? Discovery 5. The Nazca Lines, a message written on the earth itself. In the coastal desert of southern Peru, between the towns of Nazca and Palpa, the ground tells a story that can only be read from the sky. Etched into the pale reddish-brown surface of the Pampa Colorada Plateau are hundreds of lines, geometric shapes, and enormous figures of animals and plants, some stretching for kilometers across the desert floor. Together, they form one of the most extraordinary and enduring archaeological mysteries on Earth.
These are the Nazca Lines, the largest geoglyphs in the world, and the masterworks of an ancient civilization.
The Nazca Lines were created by the Nazca culture, a pre-Inca civilization that flourished in the region from roughly 100 BC to 800 AD. The lines themselves were made by a remarkably simple technique, removing the dark reddish surface stones of the desert to expose the lighter yellowish ground beneath. The contrast between the two layers creates the lines, which can be as narrow as a few centimeters or as wide as several meters. In the hyper-arid conditions of the Nazca Desert, where rainfall is almost non-existent and winds are gentle, this surface disruption has survived remarkably intact for over 2,000 years. What the Nazca people drew is astonishing in its variety. There are straight lines that run for kilometers with a precision that baffles modern surveyors, some of them maintaining an accuracy of better than 0.1% over distances of 8 kilometers without any hills or landmarks to sight along. There are geometric shapes, trapezoids, triangles, spirals, some covering hundreds of square meters, and there are the famous biomorphs, a hummingbird with a wingspan of 96 meters, a condor stretching 135 meters from wingtip to wingtip, a spider 47 meters long, a monkey with a curling tail, a human figure standing with outstretched arms on a slope known as the astronaut, and a whale, flowers, a tree, and dozens of other figures. The profound puzzle is scale. Many of the figures are so large that they are only fully visible from the air. From the ground, they appear as no more than lines of cleared stone. The full shapes, the hummingbird's wings, the monkey's spiral tail, are only revealed when seen from a height. The Nazca people had no aircraft. So who were they drawing for? This question has generated a vast range of answers, from the scholarly to the sensational. The most famous and most persistent fringe theory holds that the lines were created as landing markers for extraterrestrial spacecraft. This idea was popularized in the 1960s by Swiss author Erich von Däniken and has never gone away, despite having no archaeological support whatsoever. Mainstream archaeology provides a more grounded but still fascinating set of possibilities. The leading hypothesis among scholars is that the Nazca Lines served primarily as a ritual landscape tied to water and fertility worship. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, and the Nazca people depended on underground aquifers and seasonal river flows for survival. Analysis of the lines has shown that many of them point toward mountain peaks, horizon points associated with seasonal sunrise or sunset, or sites of ancient water rituals. The straight lines in this reading were processional pathways, routes walked during ceremonies intended to invoke rain, honor mountain deities, or communicate with the forces believed to control water in this parched landscape. Supporting this interpretation is evidence from excavations along the lines themselves. Offerings, pottery sherds, shells, feathers, and organic materials have been found at the endpoints and intersections of many lines, suggesting they were actively used for ritual purposes. The animal figures may have been totemic symbols of particular clans or communities, marking territories or serving as focuses of ceremonial identity. The sheer labor involved in creating them, estimated at millions of person-hours across centuries, indicates that this was not casual art, but an organized communal investment in a shared sacred landscape. Recent research has added new layers to the mystery. A 2019 study using drone surveys and AI-assisted image analysis identified hundreds of new geoglyphs that had previously gone unnoticed.
Like most scholars before him, Kossuth initially believed that the lines were part of an ancient irrigation system.
Smaller figures located in areas less studied than the main Pampa Colorado plateau. Among them were humanoid figures in poses that appear to show ritual action and animals not previously identified in the Nazca repertoire. Each new figure raises the same fundamental question: what did it mean to the people who spent weeks or months of their lives tracing it into the earth? What the Nazca Lines rewrote was our understanding of what ancient cultures could achieve without writing, without metal tools, and without any technology more sophisticated than wooden stakes and rope for surveying. The Nazca people created a geoglyph complex of extraordinary scale and precision in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, maintained it across centuries, and embedded within it a cosmological and ritual significance so deep that it organized the lives of communities for generations. They did not need us to see it from above for it to matter. They knew exactly what they were making. They walked these lines. They performed their ceremonies along them. They looked up at the same sky we look up at now, and saw in the stars and the rain and the mountains a set of relationships sacred enough to write into the ground itself, in a script 2 kilometers wide, patient enough to wait 2,000 years for anyone to read it. 5 discoveries, 5 moments when the Earth gave up something it had been keeping, and the world's understanding of itself changed in response. The Antikythera Mechanism proved that ancient genius could produce technological wonders we were not prepared to credit them with. Göbekli Tepe showed us that the desire to build the sacred may be older than civilization itself, that perhaps it created civilization. The Voynich Manuscript reminds us that even recent history can hold secrets our best minds cannot crack. Sacsayhuamán stands as evidence that human coordination and ingenuity can achieve what feels even now like the impossible, and the Nazca Lines wrote something into the desert 2,000 years ago that we are still only learning to read. Each of these discoveries didn't just add to what we know, they changed the shape of what we thought we knew, and somewhere out there, buried under sand or silt, hidden beneath a lake, or sealed inside a hill, there are almost certainly others waiting. That's what makes this subject endlessly fascinating. History isn't finished, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Thanks for spending your time here, and until next time, stay curious. Maybe subscribe, like, or comment too if you feel like it.